Hey, true believers, Chris Mack coming at you with Ultimate X-Men Issue 1. And I gotta say, almost 20 years later, I still absolutely enjoyed the initial run of Ultimate X-Men. I do feel like as time passed, the book got a little silly. They were trying to force old arcs like the Dark Phoenix saga and Days of Future Past, and it just got silly, and that's why they kind of had to do the whole Ultimate Comics reboot, which started out fantastic and then got silly yet again. So the print date on this book was February 2001, and this was called Tomorrow People. The writers, the creators, Mark Miller writing, Adam Kubert penciling, Art Thibert inks, Richard Eisenoff colors, Richard Starkin in comic crafts, and Wes Abnett doing letters. There's everyone else working on the book, and the X-Men were created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Now, for those of you that are younger or may have never heard of Ultimate X-Men, it was essentially, God, I love this splash page, it was Marvel's way of doing not a reboot, but kind of a way to bring in new readers instead of having to go through decades upon decades of X-Men lore. I was one of those kids back in the 90s because I started out on the animated series. And then for the comics, because we didn't really have a steady local comic shop where I would buy the X-Men adventures from the grocery stores before the direct market. So, I'd read the comic adaptations of the cartoon. And then my friend at the time started buying the Executioner event. And I saw the grittiness compared to what I was reading. And that's what kind of flipped me over to the main books. And I think at the time that was Fabian Nicieza writing. I didn't know what a Dark Phoenix was. I didn't know what a Hellfire Club was. And it took years, even to this day, like, what was it, maybe 4 years ago, something like that. I still, even with the internet, it took forever to figure out what issue of X Factor it was where Warren lost his wings. Even my local comic shop didn't know. We literally sat there for, I think, 2 hours digging through the back issues together, opening them up and flipping through them and finally finding it. I can't remember the issue number, but we will go over it, I promise. So instead of doing a reboot, as they seem to be doing constantly now, they decided to do a different run, Ultimate X-Men. And it started out with Ultimate Spider-Man, which was fantastic. And then X-Men followed, and of course the rest of the teams followed. And Mark Miller, interesting choice, as we know, if you read like Wanted, Kick-Ass, etc., so forth. I'm okay with that. But I do feel that this book really did get a little too intense. Because you see this young man here, the Sentinels coming in. You see everyone terrified at the beginning. And all it says is, sometimes it's dangerous to be a little different. And then we get that gorgeous splash page of the Sentinels. And we see them just rip into this town. And we see that same guy just in agonizing pain. And as we flip the page, and what I like is as this book, this is the introduction. So anybody that's never read an X-Men comic, this is what you're going to get. I've had X-Men under my belt for a few years at this point, so it didn't really faze me. But imagine this being your first X-Men book. My goodness, the Sentinel lands. You see the young man crying in terror that he's a confirmed mutant. Dogs barking. Now, if you're squeamish, and spoilers, just heads up. Crunch. Whoa, wow. Yeah, that was one of the things about the Ultimate Universe that a lot of people complained about, is it was a little too, I can't think of the word when things are gratuitously violent. I guess that's the best way I could put it, especially if you read Ultimate Fallout. Yeah, I still to this day don't ever want to reread that. And then we kind of get the Frank, Mark Miller. I know he's like Millar, but Mark. I'm gonna start calling him Mark Miller and Frank Miller. Frank Miller was kind of the one that I really remember doing these panels. If you go all the way back to, what was it, 88, 89's Dark Knight Returns? Yes. But anyway, it talks about how the White House is on board with the Sentinel program. They're cheering it as an absolute success. There's people fighting back against, saying this is unconstitutional. We see Magneto talking about how they're calling the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants a death cult in this book. And Magneto, oh my goodness. Because what prompted all this, and I don't know if there was another book before this that has this backstory. I don't know if it was Avengers or Spider-Man. But there was an attack on the White House. And if you guys know which book it was, let me know. But listen, on top of the artwork being absolutely fan-frickin-tastic here, Magneto's like, man is a parasite upon mutant resources. He eats our food, breathes our air, and occupies land which evolution intended Homo superior to inherit. Naturally, our attacks upon your power bases will continue until you deliver this world to its rightful owners. But your replacements grow impatient. So you get these extremists. You get like both sides of the spectrum. And then we're reintroduced to Boulevard Trask in this universe. And he's like, we've lived in the fear of the mutants for as long as I can remember, but today goes down in history as the turning point where ordinary people start fighting back. And because of Magneto's radical actions, of course there's going to be a response. You know, things are going to escalate. Now listen to this. Los Angeles was only the first step, my colleagues and I estimate that every mutant hiding in the United States will be detained within the next 6 to 8 weeks. Now, listen to that dialogue. Well, first off, I'm sorry. I got a little excited because getting to this, I was anxious to kind of go over these panels. But think about the pacing at the beginning, how there wasn't a lot of dialogue. Everything was explained in panels. It just added to that drama without excessive talking. And then we get to talking, which enhances what we just saw. And there's social satire in here. We're hearing two extremes, and then that last little blurb. That, to me, is how you organically add real-life stuff, like situations, into a book without it feeling preachy, lectury, etc., so forth. It's just in there. It's part of the story. It doesn't take you out. And that's where I'm going to leave that. Now, the next parts is we're being reintroduced to the X-Men and who are going to be key players. We're introduced to Beast. And if you go back, if you just have watched the movies, if you remember how how we're first introduced to his claws in the bar, this is very much it. Beast is trying to avoid a fight in this bar, and naturally he responds. Guy pulls a shotgun on himself and he says, "Get out of my bar, freak." Sound familiar? So I kind of like how they utilize Logan. Because if you go back and a lot of people have complained that, Anna Paquin was kind of a weird choice. But they're like, where's Rogue? Where's the Rogue we know? You know, the super strong one from the animated series. Well, in the Ultimate Universe, I think that's a lot where Bryan Singer pulled his stuff, is she never really ran into into Ms. Marvel, Carol Danvers. So throughout the entirety of the Marvel Universe, she never had flight or super strength. It was just her absorption power. And there for a while, they even killed off Gambit. And there for a while, she was stuck with his powers because they, in a sense, eloped. And of course, it wears off eventually. But it was just a different take. So if you guys watch the X-Men movies and you're pissed about Rogue, just remember that I think they pulled a lot from the Ultimate Universe, as you can see where they kind of got the introduction for Logan. Now, moving on to that, we see that Jean recruits him. And he's like, don't you ever wonder what it'd be like to live in a place where the locals aren't organizing a lynch mob the second you walk through a door? Henry McCoy? Who the heck are you? The best thing that's happened to you since they started doing Reeboks in a size 42, handsome. And, oh man, one thing that really took me back is if you kind of remember, for those of you that have read the original 1963 X-Men #1, Jean was strong. Like, she could handle herself. Even against, a bunch of rowdy, young, pubescent students, she kind of really put Cyclops and all of them in their place with her powers. But she's very low-key about it, very coy. Here, she's just sort of like up in your face. Like she goes to this police station. Now let me date this book. Now, as she comes to this place in Texas, she has a card behind her back and it says Blockbuster Video. But she has to get a mutant out of jail. So I like how they flip it around and it says FBI. Now listen to what she says. Despite the fact that I'm an attractive young girl, what your brain is actually registering at the moment is middle-aged federal agent with all the relevant identification. And then they put her in, it's just, you're sort of like, wow, this is not the Jean that I know. So making her a little like up in your face like that was just sort of like, damn, that's interesting. But I do like the mutant that they are breaking out is Aurora. And I like that they kind of kept her street theft intact. But instead of being a theft in Cairo, that at one time in history pickpocketed Xavier, she's here in Texas boosting cars. So they break Storm out, and she's like, I don't want to be a part of Magneto. And she's like, you're working for the other team now. And then we get into Colossus. And instead of Peter kind of being this hero of, oh God, what's the name? And here they call, they say his family's in Siberia, but I always forget the name of his farm. Let me know down in the comments. Claremont referenced it so many times, and you'd think it would stick, but no. Anyway, he's here in America running, he was smuggled here, and he's running guns for some nationality. I can't remember who it is. And he sends the money back home because his parents are in need. So what happens, of course, thug life, double cross. And I like is how the cacophony of gunfire happens. In silhouette, we finally get to see Colossus's powers turn. How they start to, the ricochets, the tink, tink, tink. And then one of the villains says, oh dear. And then, boom. Next page, we finally see Colossus as he should be. And it's just a great way to introduce these characters. In the beginning, like I said, other than a few wordy places, the pacing of the book overall is phenomenal. So Jean is able to reach him. I want you guys to read it because it's a very emotional moment. But she's able to reach through to this guy. Because remember, Peter has the heart of an artist. And he doesn't want to do this. He's doing it for his family. And that's why every single one of them, as we finally see the team put together, they're there reluctantly, other than Jean and Cyclops. Beast, especially Aurora, she does not want nothing to do with it. And they really make sure that their grievances are heard until they are introduced to this universe's version of Charles Xavier. And even here you can kind of see that Charles, even though he's still supposed to be, the older of everyone and their teacher, his morals at times can be questionable. So you see this empty room and a fireplace, and I like how Hank says, is this room still a library if it doesn't have any books? Now, remember how Professor X said he would never use his powers unless someone allowed him. He's like, I'm afraid, like you, my reading speed has reached the point where I can't turn the pages fast enough, Beast. I prefer to sit here instead and read the minds of my favorite writers as they type. You'd be surprised how many good ideas never make it to the printed page. Now you think, okay, that's non-invasive, but still, it's just all the years, different iterations from the animated series to Claremont, how Professor X would say that he'd never probe someone's mind unless they allowed him. Just to see him kind of do that for his leisure is just a very different take, and that was the whole point. Now as the book progresses, the team's baptism of fire, per se, instead of it being an attack on the airbase like the original X-Men, is they have to come together quickly, no training, to save a mutant who is running away from these Sentinel attacks. Because that's what the whole gist of this is. It's sort of a ticking time bomb. The United States has sanctioned these Sentinel attacks. Mutants are in fear. This is the target that Professor X wants them to get is Bobby Drake, Iceman. And he's run away from home because he's just realized his X gene is activated, has no idea what it is, but he doesn't want to be at home and be a target and, make his parents casualties of what's happening to him. So he runs. And if that sounds familiar, I think they kind of put in the movie Rogue is kind of the place of Bobby, because in the movie, Bobby's already part of the school. So Rogue, I think, kind of took the place of this. Anyway, the action here gets really awesome, and you can really start to see their inexperience. I mean, they kind of know what they're doing. This is the first time Beast has to jump through a moving van. And I like how Cyclops even just says, I know you haven't been trained for this, man. And I hate to throw this on you. He goes, I know. Perils of being the big monkey-like guy in any team, Cyclops. So he gets Bobby. Cool beans. But there's like 4 Sentinels. And Scott says, Aurora, you gotta use your powers. And she's like, forget it. You don't understand. The last time I used my powers, I harmed a whole bunch of 12-year-olds. This isn't open to debate, Aurora. And so she does. And she's like, don't blame me if I bake Manhattan. And she does it, but it takes a strain on her. So even though we see these X-Men and we've known them for years, I like that Miller here really makes sure to show that they're inexperienced. Kubert's work in the art team just really helps enhance it as it goes. I mean, look at this Cyclops carrying a passed out Aurora. And one thing I do like about Cyclops is, where is it? Hold on. Here. Cyclops actually lures the Sentinel into grabbing him. He goes, good boy. Now, I know what you're thinking, incidentally. You think the only way I can release an optic blast is to push my button on my visor, don't you? And I like this, because through the years, you're used to seeing Cyclops touch the side of his face. We get some like 008, 007 stuff. Bad news, dumbass. And you can see the power of Scott Summers. And he's going to be a little more in control because, again, in this universe, he is the first, son, I guess you could say, of Charles Xavier. Now, speaking of Xavier, there's a whole backstory that I skipped over purposely where it shows how Eric and Xavier were friends, how they both kind of had the same idea. And in this universe, instead of being doctors and philanthropists per se, overseas in Israel, I think it was, here it's in the Savage Land. They build a sanctuary for mutants. But him and Magneto have a spat. Something happens to Xavier that that happens within the throes of this falling out. So the place that we see Magneto hold up is the Savage Land. That was Xavier's original plan to take mutants until Magneto wanted to become a tyrannical overlord. So read it in its entirety. It's some really interesting stuff, the way they kind of retooled that history. And then here, in the moment of stress, there's a Sentinel that's going to fall in the crowd. And Bobby finally figures out his power. And you can just see how Bobby Drake is an Omega level mutant. You can see the madness and hatred of Magneto and what he does to humans and how he just sees them as otherly. And then you kind of get a different look at James Howlett, Logan, the Wolverine. And it's interesting how he comes to join the X-Men and what happens down the road. So guys, even though Ultimate X-Men and a lot of the Ultimate books in general were a little too gratuitous, it was really kind of a breath of fresh air instead of, like writers like Fabian Nicieza and Scott Liddell having to take and build upon decades and decades. They were kind of given, these writers here were given carte blanche to do what they want. And some of it landed, especially, that's one thing that I always give Brian Michael Bendis is his Ultimate Spider-Man's books. Freaking phenomenal. The first, really, I think I'm going to say the first 50 issues of the first Ultimate X-Men was awesome. Loved it. Then it got a little stupid. And then they bring back Ultimate Comics X-Men. And I'm not even going to talk about Fallout. But what I hated is they started out with Jean being in hiding, trying to kind of bring back the scattered X-Men, trying to find more mutants to rebuild the X-Men. And then all of a sudden, she goes and joins Zorn in some Shaolin temple. And then she tries to kill Kitty Pryde and all the X-Men all of a sudden. And that's where it got stupid for me. I don't know if she got redeemed. I just kind of gave up at that point. That irked me. So guys, if you want something that's interesting, fresh to a degree, I know it's 20 years old, but still a very good read, Ultimate X-Men #1. Please first and foremost support your local comic shop and grab a copy of this. If you've enjoyed this review, we really appreciate it. Take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. It helped the club channel more than you could possibly know. And if you don't mind hitting that fancy little X bell next to subscribe, that way as we continue to upload content, you guys get notified. Come to the channel, and we love talking with y'all and hearing your thoughts and feedback down in the comments below or our social media pages, which I'll make sure to leave the links down in the description. So with all that said, thank you so much for stopping by. Hope y'all continue to have an absolutely amazing day reading, and happy hunting, true believers.